Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this CUI webinar. We're just going to give it a few moments before we start. Just waiting for all of the attendees to arrive. So just bear with us for a few moments. Can enjoy the picture of Greg and Nader and I's faces. I'll just give it another moment or two. All right, I think we'll get started. Thanks everyone for making some time to join us today for our Main Street Metrics overview. Today we've got myself, Chris Rickett, Greg Spencer, who's a Director of Research for Canadian Urban Institute, and Nader Sharif from Environics Analytics. We appreciate you making some time. We're going to walk you through a new product line that the Canadian Urban Institute has been collaborating with Environics Analytics on, and give you an overview of how this tool can be used to support decision making along main streets and downtowns here in Canada. CUI has built out this platform based upon work that's been done over the last number of years and programs that have been delivered with our focus on main streets, recognizing ultimately main streets are the heart of our communities and are not only the places where we shop and gather, but they're ultimately bring together those essential services and civic engagement. And CUI has, of course, been very focused on supporting main streets and these places that connect residents and through our daily lives. Through the work of Canadian Urban Institute over the last number of years, we've built out a number of programs, including My Main Street, which was focused on bringing economic development data to really support local community economic development, focused on helping businesses use data to make decisions about where to invest and what types of products to focus on and where to market, as well as to help main streets and BIAs measure the impact of their activations and interventions, and ultimately help to market and focus on business attraction opportunities for their main streets. In addition to that program, CUI built out Measuring Main Street, where Greg and his team identified every main street across Canada and brought market research data from Environics to those main streets to help better characterize the characteristics and the demographics and the spending behaviors of the people within those neighborhoods. And what we've learned through bringing all of this data to communities is that it's been super helpful in decision making and reporting and building collaboration in downtown and Main Street communities. But we've also realized that learning how to use the data, delivering it in a way that's effective and easy to consume, and ultimately bringing it in an affordable fashion were all things that we wanted to continue to refine. And that's really what we've done here with Main Street Metrics, which we're going to introduce you to today, which is really taking all these lessons learned, all of this investment that's been done over the last number of years by the Canadian Urban Institute to really bring forward a product to support main streets that is accessible from a data perspective and affordable from a data perspective, to not only help you report on the activities that are going on in your downtown, but also to provide the data to support decision making. And so what is Main Street Metrics? In essence, we've developed a data-driven platform and service that is focused on helping communities measure, understand, and strengthen their main streets. And so we're bringing together interactive data dashboards, impact analysis, as well as the hands-on expert support from CUI to ultimately support BIAs and municipalities and economic development staff on what's going on in their main streets. And so this is first off really monitoring what matters. So understanding foot traffic, who's coming to your main streets, what is the business mix, what are the civic assets, what are the local demographics and behaviors, and bringing this into a visual interactive dashboard to really focus on what matters for your main street. We're then using this data ultimately to help you make smarter decisions, inform what your investments might be, how you're going to market to the local community or tourists, to inform policy and programming, and ultimately look at things like business attraction. All of this data can be used to really better understand what's going on in your main street and how you can ultimately target investments, target growth, and target new retailers and destination opportunities. And with that information, we hope that you can ultimately advocate with more confidence. So use that data to back up your funding requests and policy proposals with government, benchmark your performance against peers, and ultimately use this data to really build partnerships between yourself and your municipal partners and your business community, so that you can really align where those investments are going to happen. So what Main Street Metrics brings together is basically a local dashboard that's supported with recommendation reports. So the dashboard really brings together a number of data points so that you can track what matters. It brings together foot traffic, it brings together spending data, it brings together demographic data, a whole range of data points that really give you that full view. And you can then use that data to really track your local impact. So understanding when people are coming, the impact of your investments and events and placemaking efforts, and then ultimately use that information to inform and continue to tweak your interventions on your main street. The data that comes along as part of the Main Street Metrics dashboard is very detailed. It all really starts with foot traffic and understanding what those visitor patterns look like. So using mobile data, starting to understand where the visitors are coming from, how many are coming, and what are the different times of the week and day that they're coming to your main street. With that data in hand and understanding how many people are coming, we can then start to build profiles of what those visitors look like, both locally as well as those that are coming from farther afar, to understand their basic demographics like age and occupation and income and such, but also using Environics Analytics data and StatsCan data, build out profiles of those consumers. So understand their spending patterns. What do they spend their money on, so that you can start to look at ultimately what is the available wallet for your main street, and understanding based upon what people are spending, how do you match your business community to realize that opportunity. Also builds out media behaviors. So understanding where people are spending their time from a media perspective, so that you can target them from an advertising perspective. But then we also build out much more detailed pieces around the infrastructure, the business inventory of your community, the housing and urban form profile. All of this comes together to paint a picture of your users as well as the assets within your downtown itself. And then what we do provide beyond that dashboard is really recommendation reports that provide kind of 3 to 5 key recommendations from the data that you can use to activate. And then, of course, onboarding support and peer learning support so that you can continue to refine and build upon the knowledge of how this data and the dashboards can be used to support your ongoing decision making. With that, I think it's actually more fun to actually see the dashboard in action. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Greg, who will walk us through a dashboard example. And then we'll open it up to some question and answer. Greg?
Great, thanks, Chris. Just going to share my screen. So basically what I'm going to take you through is one of our first examples of a dashboard that we've created for a local community. In this case, it's the Downtown Halifax BIA. So the dashboards are really, as Chris was saying, it's about understanding the place, understanding how it's doing, but it's also intended to be a communications tool. So yes, there's a lot of information here for you to use to support decision making, but also helps you communicate those decisions and that information to a wide variety of stakeholders that you're dealing with. So at a very basic level, the dashboard does do that. It describes the place, describes how it's doing. When you first arrive at a dashboard, basically what it shows you is where you're talking about. So this first map is showing you the very precise geography of the Downtown Halifax BIA. And this is essentially the building block that we align then all of the data points to. And we can be very precise in that. So you can also see some high-level statistics here just to give you a flavor of sort of what's coming. But, how many people came in the most recent quarter? What is the busiest day of the week, busiest time of day? So digging into more detail, the starting point really is sort of what Chris was saying in that how many people are coming to that place. The way that we can do this is using cell phone data. Essentially, what Environics Analytics does is basically when somebody enters into that geography that we just displayed on the first map, they're basically seen as being there using the cell phone signal, counted, and then we can sort of aggregate how many people at any given point in time are in that geography. And crucially, we can see the cadence of that visitation. We can see, on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week, what time of day is busier, what day of the week, those sorts of things. But also, over longer stretches of time. So this first chart is showing, on a month-to-month basis, how many people are coming to downtown Halifax. And basically, what's really valuable about this information is you can see how places, change in response to things that are happening. So obviously, we did a lot of the early work on this sort of thing during the pandemic to see what impact that had on main streets and how hard places were hit, how fast they bounced back. So you can understand how sort of external things are affecting you and your place, but also if you're doing things. So if you're, say, putting on an event, maybe an infrastructure improvement happened at a particular point in time, going forward, you'd also be able to see the impact of that and whether or not that is having sort of the desired impact in terms of raising the number of people coming to your particular place. Just looking at even this first chart, one of the things that happens to all of us across the country, especially in Canada, is weather. And you can see very clearly in this case, the seasonal nature of visits. And this is true in pretty much everywhere in Canada, where you've got peaks and valleys. In this case, the peaks are the summer months, so July, August being the busiest months, the winter months being sort of lower visitation, and then you've got your shoulder seasons. So, I mean, from a strategic point of view, at a very basic level, say you're putting on an event in Halifax, downtown Halifax, part of your strategy is, well, are you trying to raise those winter months up? Are you trying to maybe focus on your shoulder seasons and extend that peak? Or maybe you're just doubling down on your strengths and doing more in those peaks to make them even higher peaks. But the point is that you'd be able to then see the impact over time of those efforts. as well as some of the information that I'm about to show you in terms of how to do that in a more effective way. So that's sort of the top level. Again, you can see on the dashboard, which days of the week are busier than others. If you want to just sort of isolate, these are all interactive sort of data elements. I'll also note that, as I was saying earlier, this is a communications tool. So these are exportable images. So if you're creating a report for, say, stakeholders, and you want to clip these out, it's very easy. We've made it very easy for you to do that kind of thing. Another obvious thing here is that, as we noted off the top, Saturday's the busiest day in downtown Halifax. Sunday's the least busy day. So again, from a strategic perspective, maybe more events on a Sunday than a Saturday, that kind of application. Time of day as well. A lot of places are maybe working on a nighttime economy strategy, trying to bring those evening visits up, and then tailoring some of the events, but also the things that are on offer to that time period. We can also then look at a lot more detail. What's great about the data from Environics is not just that you can get a count of the number of people that are coming, but you can know a lot about who those people are and where they're coming from. That allows you to be more strategic in the choices that you're making in terms of understanding your audience, what they're likely to be seeking in your place, and maybe even understanding what gaps might exist in terms of expectation versus the reality, trying to bring those things together as best as possible, and ultimately bringing up those visitor numbers. So what we see here at the beginning of this page is a heat map. This is essentially showing you where the visitors are coming from. So these are basically their home locations, their home 6-digit postal codes basically mapped out. And you can see, obviously darker red, you've got more visitors. So, your local catchment is almost always where, your core constituents are, including even downtown places. And what's really interesting about Halifax is you can sort of see the regional picture, and then even for the whole of the East Coast, you can start to even understand how important downtown Halifax is to many other places and communities on the East Coast. Many things exist in downtown Halifax that maybe don't exist in a lot of smaller communities and are generating a lot of trips from further away as well. So we can get into even more specific way of looking at those visitor distances. This chart is ultimately showing what share of visits are coming based on how many kilometers away. So the x-axis is, kilometers from the BIA. And you can see in this case quite clearly that basically it's shaded by quarters. So 25% of all visitors to downtown Halifax live less than 5 kilometers away from the BIA. Another 25%, so we could say half of all visits come from less than 10 kilometers away. Then at the other end, you can see that almost a quarter of visits come from outside of the city, ultimately, more than 50 kilometers, and many coming from even much further away. Now, of course, those different visits are going to have different purposes, different reasons, and different profiles of who those people are. So one of the other things that we're providing here is sort of a summary of what the visitor sort of types are aligned to the distance that they're coming from. So right now, what we're seeing is basically visitor profiles from people who are very local, less than 1 kilometer or less. And what we use here is Environics Analytics consumer segmentation system called Prism. They have a vast number of data sets about the Canadian population. I think there's 50,000 different things you can know about Canadians. That's obviously a lot of information. So one of the ways to understand that, communicate it, and really summarize it is that they look at the relationships between things, understand how different segments of the population tend to cluster, especially in particular locations, and so create these sort of archetypes of households and give them segment names and just sort of descriptions of what not only the demographic characteristics of those households are like, but the spending patterns, the media behaviors, the psychographic kinds of indicators, understanding how people are making choices, what kinds of things motivate them, and what they're really likely to respond to when you're trying to target them. So, the downtown dwellers, these are the immediate local population. You can see that most of them fit into this one category called social networkers. The next one down is called friends and roomies. But like a lot of downtowns, Halifax is populated by, younger people in their 20s and 30s, mostly single person households, fairly well educated, starting out in white collar sort of occupations, that kind of thing. And then they have a certain type of consumer profile, certain things they're going to more likely spend their money on, and you can start to glean what those things are. Then people who are coming from maybe not immediately local, but within sort of the Halifax metropolitan region, you can start to see that that gets a little bit more segmented. There's sort of a bit more of a dispersal of different types of profiles. People coming from more suburban areas, for example. But again, getting a sense of who those people are in quite a lot of detail and where they're coming from. And then people who are coming from outside the city, so more than 50 kilometers away. A lot of people coming from small towns. Again, maybe things that are available in downtown Halifax that might not be available in their local towns. But understanding what those things are, and again, being able to reach those people and signal what is indeed there for them. So that's the sense of what we can know about the visitors. And as I was saying, we can also describe the place in a lot of detail as well. So what is there? So we can look at the local infrastructure as well as the business mix, the civic infrastructure mix, where the housing is, where the jobs are, and understanding the relationships between all of those sorts of things. So first of all, this is just a sort of a basic business map of where the Main Street businesses are. At a very high level, we tend to classify Main Street businesses into three broad categories: retail, food and drink, that's your bars, restaurants, cafes, and then local services. That could be anything from a barbershop to a local bank branch. Plotted out just to understand where those things exist. And then we can get into a lot more detail. So we know, not just sort of those high levels, but then getting into sort of more specific categories of kinds of businesses that exist and how many there are of each of those types to understand what is on offer in your local geography. Civic infrastructure works very similarly. These are things that have a bit more of a public sector component to them. So arts and culture, education, government, community services, recreation, and healthcare, and where those things are. Also big generators of trips to your local area. And I think you also want to think about maybe sort of the combinations of some of these things. So maybe you come downtown for a dentist appointment, but you go get lunch afterwards, and understanding sort of the interplay between different components of what you've got in your area. And again, more detail in terms of specific counts of more specific things there. Got a lot of information on housing. So literally every housing residential address mapped out for your geographies. Every dot is basically a residential location. The bigger dots are basically multifamily addresses. So, an apartment building here with, say, 108 units, for example, as well as how that relates to commercial addresses. So the blue ones are commercial, orange are residential, and then green are mixed use. And again, showing how many units. So you can see the interplay between your, say, office, your core office area, and your residential areas, as well as some basic information about the housing mix. So when things were built, what type of housing you've got in your geography. Employment as well, so where the jobs are. Again, we've got it segmented in those three ways that we had before. So Main Street businesses, civic infrastructure locations, and then all other employers as well, and how many jobs at each location. As well as a bit of information about the types of employment that people are in. The final piece then is also understanding the people. So we've got how many people are visiting, what is there in terms of the infrastructure and the business mix, civic infrastructure mix. The final tab here is the neighborhood profile. So understanding the people in your local area at a higher level of detail. So starting off with some basic things around, just the age structure, for example, here on this chart, downtown Halifax, like a lot of downtowns, skews very young. So you can see here, you've got a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, not a lot of children. But these are the kinds of things that obviously you've got to adjust your location to serve better. Income, so household income, and this is household income rather than individual income. In this case, it looks a bit lower. Again, there's a lot of single people in downtowns, and so not a lot of dual income earners. You're going to have household incomes that are somewhat lower as a result. Now, we've got income, but then crucially, I think for a lot of people who are managing these sorts of places, really want to know how that income is being used. Like, what are people actually spending that money on? And whether or not that aligns with what you've got to offer. So here we can see the downtown Halifax basic income level, then segmented sort of in terms of how that is then allocated over the course of the year. So people in the 1 year would spend about $16,000 on shelter, about $10,000 on food, for example, and you can compare that to the regional picture. Then we can get into a lot more detail. So if we're looking at those categories that are there, you can click on any of these and get more information about sort of the more specific sort of segments beneath those broader categories and how much household budget is going to each of those items. A lot more detail on food as well, especially as restaurants are a big part of Main Street's. Understanding how much money is being spent in restaurants versus grocery stores, for example. And then even within that restaurant spend, how many people are actually sitting down and eating their meal in the restaurant itself? In this case, it's around 2/3. And then home delivery, takeout being big, and in many cases rising sort of ways that people are consuming restaurant meals. We've also got a lot of information here on online spending. Even before the pandemic, a lot of Main Street's experiencing strain around more and more retail activity happening online. This is showing you sort of which areas are more likely to be going in that direction. And then finally, last piece here is media behaviors. This is showing you, which digital platforms people in your area tend to use at what frequency. So within the last week, what percentage of the population used each of these platforms, for example. So again, if you're marketing your place, marketing maybe even a specific event, and you've got a budget to do so, but you've got this wide range of choices, where do I spend that marketing money? This will help you guide you, towards the ones that are more likely to reach the audience you're trying to get. Traditional media as well, so not just the digital platforms, but also more traditional media like TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, that sort of thing. And again, understanding which ones are more prevalent. So this is where we're at right now. What I've just showed you is essentially where the standard dashboard product is. There's certainly more coming, and there will always be more coming. Part of this, what we're doing, working with people like yourselves, is obviously we're trying to align this to your needs as best as possible. So constantly having a conversation with people like yourselves in terms of what information do you really need to make the case for the kinds of things, kinds of choices that you're making, but also how do we communicate that to the people that matter to you as well, and how do we help you do that better is a big part of this exercise. So constantly having that feedback, understanding how we can continually make this better to suit your needs is part of this whole process. This is a subscription service. It's meant to be an ongoing relationship that we can continue to find ways to support the work that you're doing. I'll just mention a couple of things that are in the pipeline, and I saw one question already in the chat, so I'll address that one right now, is that we had mentioned in the beginning slideshow, there's going to be some information on the health of businesses. So we're working with a company called Dun & Bradstreet that essentially does business credit scores. And we're working with a couple of their metrics around the percentage of businesses that are, in delinquent payment sort of situations, as well as a risk score, understanding the likelihood of any given business going out of business in the next 12 months, those kinds of metrics to understand sort of the health of your business community and bringing that into the dashboard as well. We're also working with, trying to work with MasterCard to bring in actual spending data, so card payment data, to understand in that same sort of cadence that we see the visitor data, to understand sort of how payment or actual purchases in your geography are fluctuating over time. Because ultimately, we want to know how many people are coming, how much money they're spending, and how well those businesses in your geography are doing as a result of that activity, and what you can do ultimately to try and make that as best as possible. All right, I'll leave it there, and I think we can open it up for some questions at this point.
Perfect. Thanks, Greg. We've got lots of questions in the chat. If anybody has any questions, please throw them into the chat, and I'll just start pulling them out here. First question is about data. Is all the data sourced from Environics? Greg, do you want to speak to
that? Of most of it, I would say. The vast majority of what you just saw is coming from Environics Analytics. Some of the underlying geographic data is coming from things like OpenStreetMap, for example. And then I just mentioned that we're trying to bring in additional data sets. The business credit scoring, the consumer, the card payment data. And you'll see, the full price range of this product. There's, a light version, a standard version, and a custom version. In the case of a custom version, we can also work with you if you've got your own data, or you can find data from, say, your municipal open data platform. Anything that has a geographic component to it, we can find a way to integrate it. So that's another thing that can be brought in. And I'll mention one other piece that we're currently working on is both climate data. So, obviously we saw that fluctuation in terms of seasonality, but we know even on a, smaller scale, if you've got an event and it rains, what does that mean? That kind of thing. And even more, I think, exciting in that space is that we've started a conversation with a company called Purple Air, which does air quality readings, and that you can, have a very low cost sensor in your place and understand the air quality. And again, especially as we're dealing with things like wildfires and things of that nature, understanding how those things influence how much human activity is happening in your space. Especially, Chris was talking about advocacy. In that case, if wildfires are really having a negative impact on your place and on your economy, being able to quantify that and then say the provincial government or the federal government, hey, if you don't prevent forest fires, these are the actual consequences that we're dealing with. So let's try to do a better job of that.
Perfect. And I think building on that, Greg, the question is, how does the data recognize those that live in the mapped area? So this really comes back to the locational data. And I think, highlighting, based upon the mobile phone data, we can profiles of the various locations that people are coming from. Do you and Nader want to dig into that a little bit more?
Sure, I'll take the first crack if that's okay, Nader. I mean, there's two things here. First of all, the building block for a large swath of any very local data in Canada is obviously the census. So, getting that basic profile of a place using that basic tool. But then, we can layer a bunch of other things and attach other things to that. Environics does modeling to try to understand sort of even, census is every 5 years, to understand sort of how that is shifting between the census periods and what that looks like. And then there's all kinds of like consumer level data that's also can be attributed to postal codes and modeled to those geographies. So that's about describing, residential locations. But then how Environics attaches the cell phone data to that is essentially, a device enters into that geography, and it is essentially recorded as being there. But if you're like me, most people, I think you take your phone home with you at night, you leave it next to your bed, it's charging, it's on. And if it's in a regular place overnight, on a regular basis, then that's assumed to be where that phone lives or where that person carrying that phone lives, right? So that's how that connection is made. Obviously, it's more complicated than that in practice, but that's the gist of it. And so that's how we link the visitors coming to the place back to that home location. And then there's a whole lot of, beyond the census, a lot of other data collection instruments that are then attached to both a 6-digit postal code geography, but also a dissemination area, which is sort of like one of the smallest units of a census geography.
I would like to add just one thing about where the phone sleeps. Now, you're right, Greg, you're totally right in that all of that happens and all of that is collected. But then the position of that, the geolocation of that phone gets jittered so that it's connected to the centroid of the postal code. So it does not get connected back to the actual household. Okay, and that is to maintain privacy compliance in a Canadian context. So you're right. The geolocation of the phone gets recorded where it sleeps, but then that location becomes blurred to the geofence of the 6-digit postal code of where that phone is sleeping, not the actual household. So it can't be linked back to an individual. It can only be linked back to a 6-digit postal code.
Right. And I'll just even add even more onto that, is that when we get the data at our end, all of that data is aggregated. So we don't have any information about individuals scattered or not scattered. It's all bundled together. So there's no danger whatsoever of any individual data points being hacked or anything like that. They simply don't exist in our system at all anywhere. So if you're having concerns around privacy and security, we take obviously those things very seriously, but it's fundamentally built in a way that's like an impossibility.
Yeah. But it's all anonymized at the end of the day. That said, because things are tied to a 6-digit postal code, we're ultimately able to create good insight that can support your decision making and understand ultimately the various areas people are coming from to your downtown, so that you can really segment. These are the people that live within my downtown, and this is what they're all about. This is their interests. This is what they spend money on, so that you can really look at, okay, these are the people that live downtown. These are the types of stores I might want to try to curate, or business opportunities. Flip side, these are the folks that may be coming from the suburbs in my community. Their interests might be a little bit different. They may be coming down for your events. Okay, how do you market to them to get them to come to more activations in your downtown? But that's the ultimate value here, is that we can build profiles of the different segments of people that are visiting your downtown. A good question here around clustering. So Main Streets benefit from a number of destinations clustered together. That diversity obviously is critical to a downtown. And what the question here is really, is there a tool to measure the number, types of services people visit per trip? That's a good question. Definitely of interest. At this dashboard level, we're not we can't tell you where people are traveling within your downtown, but that is a much more of a custom solution that that could be further discussed with the CUI and Environics Analytics team. If you really want to understand, people are coming downtown, then what individual locations or how many different locations they might be going to would be a further analysis we could do.
Yeah.
Another good question here around whether there's business info available. So business counts, industry, number of employees. So yes, this is something that's included in the dashboard. but doesn't get as detailed as this question is asking around ownership diversity, but does give you an overview of the overall business counts and employees. And we are looking at how we build out some of the business impact pieces, like around tariffs. So as Greg alluded to, around understanding, their likelihood to survive, what their confidence levels are all additional data points that we're bringing into the system right now. I don't know, Greg, Nader, if you want to add a little bit more on the business side.
Greg, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, with the the data that we have right now, like Chris was saying, we've got, the 6-digit detailed industry code, so we know what that industry or what that company does, the name of it, an estimate of the number of employees, and an estimate of the revenue at that location as well. So that's sort of part of the standard package. We have also in other circumstances brought in, custom data to this mix. So some places, want us to work with their business registry or the business license data, which would provide more information, potentially even on ownership, for example. Some of the data that comes from the business credit scoring companies also includes some flags potentially around, the type of person that owns the business, that kind of thing. So there are different sources of business data, and we can work to bring those together. And a lot of the time, it's sort of the right tool for the right job, possible in the custom solution, I think, in many cases.
Perfect. And there was a follow-on to that around plug-in to make available on your website. So that is something we're working on as part of the next iteration, and that's something we can discuss with folks that are interested in the dashboard. Another question here around integrating other data sets, specifically property values, property taxes, to measure the value that's being created. So how we roll out the dashboards is we have kind of 3 levels. One is light, one is standard, one is custom. We'll speak to that when we finish up here. But under the custom dashboard, we can bring in other data sets from your open data portfolios or your business directories or wherever that data may come from. And yes, so if you were interested in sharing property taxes or assessment values, that is something that could be integrated for sure. Question about the media behaviors and whether the data was current, and a concern that Facebook seems overweighted. So yes, this data is current. It's updated on a regular basis. Yes, people are still using Facebook. And I think ultimately, depending on the demographic and the users, of course, you're going to see that shift. But we do see a pretty high usage of Facebook across a lot of communities at the end of the day. It really comes down to the amount of time someone may be spending on that platform as well.
Yeah, generally speaking, in our data, Facebook has become a ubiquitous platform.
Yeah,
across the board. So it is, we're not seeing a lot of fluctuation in general. Now you're seeing it, obviously, there's going to be lower rates among younger populations, but they still use it. It's just the level of activity that takes place.
Yeah. Data on foot traffic, directions people are walking through the area. I think we somewhat covered this. I don't know, Greg, Nader, do you want to build upon foot traffic data and how people are traveling within the downtown?
That, from our perspective, from the EA perspective, that steps over. Okay, so everything that we do at EA is built using the 7 privacy by design principles to the point where we are certified for it and we are audited against it on a regular basis. Now, in order to manage that, we have to make sure that our data is built with privacy forward thinking from inception through to go to market, through to launch. So when we start looking at things like directionality and things like that, that's where we start playing around with the possibility of re-identification, and that's not an area that Environics Analytics is prepared to operate in. So we don't deal in directionality of traffic. is the short answer to your question.
Perfect. I'm going to stay on this locational data. Just another question here around visitor data and whether it takes into account American or other visitors.
The Environics data is purely domestic, so it's Canadians. The one way that we're aiming to get at the international visitors and their impact is with the MasterCard data, which is that we'll be able to see how many of the cards are Canadian cards versus international cards. So we're hoping that we'll be able to integrate that coming up soon.
Perfect. And that's a nice lead into the other questions, which were all about spending and spending data. So a question here around understanding total sales. So we are in the process, as Greg has alluded to, of right now within the platform, which Greg shared, you'll have your what I would say is your available wallet of your local population. So based upon what they're actually spending from a household expenditure perspective, whether that be on food or groceries or laundry or clothing, to really help you understand, the available wallet and how you might try to capture some of that wallet. The flip side of that is we'll be looking to work with MasterCard. We're still ironing out the details of that agreement, but that will bring in actual spending within your geographic area. And that will be broken down by transaction numbers and then broken down by retail, services, and hospitality. So you can get a sense of those three categories, what the spending is looking like from an actual perspective, recognizing that it's not just your local market that spends in your downtown, but it's also, all the places you're drawing people from. So that's a next iteration of the dashboard and a future data availability that we hope to see in early 2026. Another question. So there's some other kind of few questions here around determining how people get to the downtown. Greg, Nader, do you want to speak to that?
Do you want to take this, Greg, or?
Right now we don't know for sure, how those trips are being made. That being said, we know the distance of the trips. We can also see, sort of the typical commuting sort of mode share based on home locations. Do people typically drive? Do they, take transit, walk, that sort of thing? So it's possible to sort of piece those together to get sort of a general understanding of how people might be coming to your area. Obviously the people living within 10 minutes are likely to be using active transportation, for example, that kind of thing. Again, in custom solutions, we're looking at bringing in, transit ridership, even specifically, line by line, that kind of thing. Those are the things that can be used to supplement, I think, what we've got on the standard dashboard. That's sort of the direction that things are going.
Yep.
Perfect. And yeah, as we were, I'll also just kind of bring up, so question around ultimately, what is the cost of this? Again, what we've tried to do, CUI and working with Environics Analytics, is how do we bring these typically, very detailed data, deliver it in a way that it's accessible and also at a price point that is affordable. So we've really built out 3 levels of solutions from a dashboard perspective. We've got the light version, the standard version, and the custom version. These are annual fees. So the dashboard that you saw today was basically the standard version, which provides a bit more detail and is updated on a monthly basis. We also have the light version, which is at $10,000 a year. And again, includes pretty much everything you saw in the standard version, but a little less detail on consumer spending patterns and media behaviors, as well as the detail on the psychographic profiles. And then, as mentioned, we can also do a custom solution for your downtown that might include open data sets from your community, things like, property assessment, property taxes, building permits, development applications, 311 reports, your own business directory, you name it. If there's a data source, we can look at how it's integrated. I think ultimately the key, though, is identifying those data sources that are going to help you from a decision-making perspective. We've done, in some cases on that custom solution, multiple geographies within a downtown. So you can split up your downtown and we can see what the foot traffic looks like in different areas as well, which helps you further segment those audiences. So this gives you a bit of a sense of the cost per year and the update frequency of those data points. We'll share this deck with everyone post workshop, but this gives you a better sense of what data is included. And ultimately, again, recognizing what we're really trying to do here is bring this cost down. Buying this data, putting it into a dashboard, trying to get the analysis out. Doing this on your own is, a significant cost. But ultimately what we're delivering here is the dashboard, a recommendation report, so you've got some things to act upon, and then of course supporting you from an onboarding perspective. So this just gives you a bit of an idea of the costs themselves, and what we will do is share this with everyone. And if you're interested in further exploring, we'd be more than happy to share with you, discuss your use case specifically, and see how we might be able to help you in your community. Other than that, have a great day. We'll be in touch shortly, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thanks, Nader. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.